Hello everyone, welcome and thank you very much for coming. This is really exciting for me personally. I've got a great venue. If you can see out behind you, we've got a lovely view of the Tower of London. I was tempted to make a joke about related to the Tower of London, but maybe that's not a good idea. This is a fantastic panel and we've got some really interesting thoughts. At the title of what we're going to discuss, really to get us going, kind of 1 year on, we met a lot in the last few years, but we talked specifically a year ago about the kind of landscape for energy storage and how it's changed as far as the insurance aspect is concerned, which to me, I'm not in the insurance business, you all are, is so important. It's such a key part of the industry, and as you know as well, any time I'm talking about energy storage, I'm telling people get insurers involved right at the start, really early. So I'm delighted to have you all here. What I'm going to do is let you all introduce yourselves, and I'm going to do the dutiful thing and start ladies first. So Maria, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Maria Malduenda. I work with Justin. I'm part of the Lion Tamer, Xtralis, and now owned by Honeywell team. I work in demand generation, so I've had the privilege of really talking to a lot of insurers in the past 2 years, really nail down what they need to see from people like us who manufacture safety products and from projects, and it's been a pleasure to really see how the industry has evolved. So thank you everyone for being here. It's been a pleasure to organize.
Hello, Sam Northcote Green. I'm a renewable energy insurance broker at Lockton's. We work very closely with a lot of UK-based battery owners and operators, but we have a global footprint as well. So we have various projects, from Australia to the US to Latin America. So yeah, it's a very interesting time to be in this space.
Hi, Duncan Gordon, head up the renewable energy team of Gallagher, an insurance broker, active globally. So we look at all sectors of energy, power, renewables, and certainly in recent years have seen a huge growth trend in battery developments.
Hi, my name's Liam McAneny and I work for Access Specialty Europe. I'm an underwriter working specifically in the renewable energy team. We focus on onshore wind, offshore wind, solar and battery energy storage, which is probably the fastest growing area of our book. So yeah, great to meet all the team here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tom Harris. I'm a partner at Nardac. We're a specialist renewable energy and insurance broker and operate globally and across all technologies. And most recently, battery storage is particularly important to us, where more and more clients are building more and more projects all over the place.
Thank you all. And last and definitely least, I'll just reintroduce myself. Justin McNamara, this is one of my daughter's phrases, a wizened veteran of the safety industry. I think she thought that was being kind, but I've taken it as an insult. I've been involved in the kind of general detection safety business for about 30 years, from advanced smoke detection, and focused the last 2 years on Lion Tamer electrolyte vapor lithium-ion battery solvent detection system, which is a very important part of a full safety picture that I think the industry needs. And stressing again, reiterating, it's great to have you all here. I want to start off with just a general question. Anybody can pick it up if they fancy. I mentioned, has the market, the industry moved on? Are you starting to find people talking to you much earlier in their development plans stages? Are they effectively, I'm not saying it's my message, but are they coming to you earlier and more openly? Anybody want to pick up on that one?
I'm happy to jump in there. So I think the answer is yes, absolutely. People, understand that insurability is key to projects getting off the ground. And perhaps historically people would, come to you with a project that's already in construction or just about to start construction and say, go and insure it. With batteries, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. You know, it's been a pretty hard insurance market for batteries for a few years, but that's started to soften as confidence has grown in the technology and the general risk profile. But you know, still people want to test what, you know, the boundaries of insurability is. You know, they want to try and maximise the capacity for their, you know, plot of land that they've got. You know, their grid connection might be 40 megawatts, but they might have a, you know, very small plot of land, so they might experiment with, you know, slightly left field, you know, designs. Double stack batteries might be something that we'll get onto at some point today, but you know, people have really pushed the boundaries, and they want to make sure that when they do go to build these projects, that they can get insurance. So, you know, we play a vital role, both brokers and insurers, in you know, determining what that is. And I think, you know, I speak for myself here, people have been quite receptive to feedback, you know, from an early stage from insurers, and they've gone back and, you know, taken the recommendations on board, and perhaps in some cases completely redesigned projects. And you know, we do feel like we are a vital, you know, cog in a big machine, but a very important one, and you know, they can't get these projects off the ground without us.
Well, quite, yeah. I'm pleasantly astonished that they'll change their plans, but once they've spoken to you on your advice, that is a change, I think.
Yeah, but it's an interesting point because, as you said, insurability is the key problem at the start, right? It's not a case of, I think initially people would come to you and say, can you get us a cheaper deal, or can you get us the lowest price? But with batteries, it's a case of standing back one step and saying, hang on a sec, is this insurable in the first place? Yeah. You work out if it's insurable, and then you can have the discussion about, can you get a better price? Other technologies that are more mature, generally you're talking about price quite early on, whereas batteries, you're taking a bit of a step back. And also, I think people are building second projects, third projects, fourth projects, their fifth project, and they've learned from the first one where they've maybe been told, this is really difficult, or that's really expensive, and then they come back and say.
At the same time as well, there's like less of a fear factor from the insurer's side. So I think that's coupled by, you know, maybe a more limited insurer pool a few years ago. It's expanded now. There's more options for clients. Certainly more brokers, you know, in the market, active in the battery space. But that early engagement is starting to see fruition, and I suppose the risk quality and risk control that's now factored in early on is starting to translate in the insurer's output. So I suppose you've sort of seen an upturn in.
Well, it's also insurers being able to gauge what they believe is insurable. I mean, as an insurance company, especially a specialty insurance company, you work on a big data set. You insure lots of different assets, and you're able to see trends and kind of when you think losses might happen, or you know, what is the best in class. Because it's such a new industry, we don't have that early raw data to really truly understand what we didn't say, kind of what was best in class, and able to offer probably kind of wider terms that battery operators were after. We've now had, I mean, at Axis anyway, kind of 5 or 6 years writing battery energy storage, so we've kind of got a grip of what we think is best in class. But there's also been, in those stages, a lack of market standards or kind of certification, and third bodies who are kind of able to point us in the right direction to say this is, you know, this is something we back and we're happily invest in, and you should insure. So, but we are thankfully seeing kind of better testing, certification now that kind of gives comfort to insurers and the ability to insure these assets, but also kind of as they're growing and more people to insure them who maybe hadn't wanted to before.
Lots of really good points there. One that I love particularly is about the lack of data sets, which I know has been a common problem in this industry, you know, and it's the same everywhere. And I don't know how to phrase this politely, but it would certainly help me if the manufacturers, the battery manufacturers, would share their data a bit more. And I think it's wrong. I don't know how you would force them to do it, but having access to that data, and maybe we'll talk about second life batteries later, which I know is a contentious topic. Not everybody wants to talk about it, but that data that they have, whether it's limited and not as good as they think it is, if they shared it, I'm sure the whole industry would benefit more.
We've had this in particularly wind in the past as well. We've had a data problem, and it's when you've got a seller's market, then they can dictate terms. And at the moment, it's a seller's market on the supply chain side. But at some point that turns, and then buyers can have maybe a bit more power in the discussions, and they start to say, look, we've got some experience, we want more access to the data from day one. Independent service providers come into the market, and then that sort of snowballs. So I think it's a common path to start off this way, but eventually it tends to open up a bit more.
I've been doing research in asking insurers what they think about energy storage for about 2 years now, and I remember at the beginning I tried to contact all the insurers working in the space in the world, because I was in a global team, and there weren't a lot. A lot of them had more questions than answers for me, but I've seen a very drastic change in the knowledge that you guys, the insurers, have, and insurance brokers. Their questions have been more complex, and I think that underwriters are really catching up to the industry, and that's a testament to the insurance market, that they're really catching up quickly. They know what to ask. At first, I was introducing them to our product, Line Tamer. Now everyone's a lot more knowledgeable, so I think that there is data gathering, and it's going quickly. What I want to know is, how do we speed that up? How do we talk to you more efficiently? What do we need to prove to you guys, to the market, so that this technology and then codes and standards can go even quicker and hopefully safer?
I think that's a very good question. As brokers, I think we'll find that it takes a long time to get insurers comfortable with a particular risk. There are so many variations in, battery technology. You might have a different cell density being used at one project, although, until you actually dive into the weeds and look at the real, technical details, that might not be apparent to begin with. So, if there was almost a common battery technology being used across numerous projects, then it would be a lot easier to go to insurers and say, look, it's exactly the same as that project. You've got a very limited underwriting requirement on this, and then you can sort of just get a price pretty quickly. But at the moment, it's quite a long process to get insurers on board with a particular risk, because there are so many variations in the various OEMs technology and the cells, etc. So
some of the most critical reports, the UL 9540A reports, sometimes they're not even, the tests haven't been done yet when they've secured a supply contract. So from our perspective as brokers, you go back to the client and say, can you ask for the cell module, maybe the unit level report? And sometimes the answer back is, they haven't done the test yet, because this is a brand new technology, and they're getting it off the production line. That's going to come in 5-6 months' time, and it's quite an important result, right, as to the insurability and the risk factors and whatnot. So there is a bit of catching up. Everyone's sort of chasing their tail a little bit in the industry as it matures.
Well, you wouldn't, in kind of wind and solar, you wouldn't normally insure a project that wasn't kind of certified, or at least offer full coverage, until the whole turbine or the whole kind of the solar panel was certified to a certain standard. Kind of battery energy storage, because there's so many individual parts that are produced by so many individual partners, that having a full system certification is obviously quite tricky, but obviously isn't happening until quite far down the line, when they're already quite a lot in mass production and out there. So until that's done, you do kind of take a step back and go, well, if you've not had a third party who said, yeah, this is going to work, then it's quite tricky as an insurer to kind of put our commitment behind the project, when it's not quite chicken and egg. I think one should definitely be happening first before we're asked to step up. But thankfully that is improving.
Liam, is it fair to say that yourselves and other insurers are probably technology agnostic? I mean, that's how we see it. I think, whilst the industry is still maturing, a lot of, let's say, your feedback can be driven by claims data. So it's only once you have sort of a spate of series losses in a particular supplier or OEM that you could perhaps pinpoint, a higher perceived technology risk than another. Is that a fair comment, or?
Well, I mean, yeah, we certainly learn our biggest lessons from claims. I mean, that's kind of when changes are made in the industry, where we kind of relay our concerns and hope that kind of those on the ground can pick them up. Admittedly, kind of having only underwritten batteries for, half a decade, there isn't that claims data. But thankfully, we have probably one of the biggest books of battery storage, probably as of any insurer. So we've also had lots of claims. So we have had lessons learned. And we do try to relay them to yourselves. And I think kind of talking about natural spacing between containers is something we're often pushing for. We want to kind of mitigate any kind of thermal runaway fire scenario that may happen with an enclosure or in a container, to kind of maintain it as small as possible. And I think that's been picked up on. And that's also helped give comfort to a lot of other insurers to mitigate that kind of what is a normal loss scenario to not be catastrophic like we thought it might be kind of a few years ago.
A couple of really interesting points there, and I can't help but go a little bit salesy and talk about line tamer and its ability to be chemistry agnostic. So we don't care what lithium-ion batteries people put in; it will detect to varying degrees, but always much earlier than anything else. One of the things that kind of strikes me a little bit, I think, I haven't studied it in huge great detail, but over the last year or so, I think we're having fewer incidents, I think, but I'm not certain. We're still having them, of course, but as we start to have, whatever projection you look at, we're going to have so many BESSes that we won't be able to move for them in 10 years' time. If the percentage even of incidents either stays the same or just drops by a little bit, there's still quite a lot of incidents that are happening. Are they changing your approach? Incidents that happen, do you study those and change your approach?
It's a difficult one. There's the global database, wiki engineered that looks at sort of global. Yeah. And if you look at it for the last year, it's throwing out about a dozen publicly available, major incidents. The reality is probably a few more than that. But if you compare that to sort of 2019, it's in a much better place. And then if you draw the volumes of megawatts now deployed, proportionally, that's already heading the right direction. So I suppose
Great news for all of us, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the issue is always going to be, it's the size, right? So the frequency is one thing, and then it's the size is the other one.
Yeah.
The severity, I guess. So.
Are they getting bigger all the time?
Well, this is the man who can answer that.
Well, I mean, projects themselves are getting bigger. I mean, we were kind of limited to 50 odd megawatt projects in the UK now. I mean, the submissions we're getting through from these guys here, we're looking at 200 megawatts, 300 megawatts, 500 megawatts. They're really increasing in size, which in turn is great. The industry's developing, but the loss scenarios are probably going to increase in size as well. We're looking at kind of inflation and ensuring costs for not just your raw materials, but the manufacturers and their shelf price. For us as well, looking at claims, we're not just looking at the property damage, but we're after ensuring the loss of revenue for your downtime. A kind of a same scenario this year compared to maybe 3 or 4 years ago. The supply chain constraints that we have worldwide, it's going to take an awful lot longer to get some spare parts over where we need them. And that in turn, and with them being more expensive probably when they would have been, you could be looking at a kind of 9-fold loss where you've got 3 times as long to get there. Electricity prices are God knows how much more than they were a few years ago. So it's a really different risk profile where we are thankfully seeing less, but the severity of that when that occasion happens is much, much more.
There is another variable that's not always discussed. There's always size of project, yes, but also the use of these energy storage units in urban environments. Do you see that installing energy storage in cities or buildings with people in them, is that gone up in your portfolio? Do you insure projects like that, or how does that variable kind of factor in?
Just looking at the UK in particular, where a lot of the new development is, and from my perspective, a lot of our businesses, I'd say most of those projects are in urban environments, or they have got residential buildings relatively close by, sometimes watercourses. So you do raise a good point, and I think the industry perhaps hasn't done enough. I've got to be careful what I say here, but hasn't done enough to perhaps highlight the potential knock-on effect of a bad battery fire, causing harm to third parties, and really knocking the industry back a few steps after making so much progress over the last few years. If there's a big fire in an urban area and it causes harm to people or property that's not related to the battery itself, then people are going to suddenly realise that there are a lot of these things in their backyards, and there might be a lot of opposition. So we very much hope that won't happen for obvious reasons. But I think, just speaking openly, I think it's something the industry and perhaps insurers need to think a bit more about as well.
Really good point. And one of my philosophies is just to try and be open and honest. And I said it many times, lithium-ion batteries are absolutely fantastic. We need our BESS so that we can get to the targets we've set ourselves or have been set for us in terms of net zero. But there can potentially be problems. Be open and honest about it. Talk about the safety mitigating factors that can be done, the way the system is designed. Tell people properly insured. You've got a policy for any environmental issues. All of these things. Educate people. Tell them, and they'll be happier. We'll all feel more comfortable that we're being open, honest, and sharing the information, and we'll get to where we need to have a completely self-supplying renewable energy sources without suffering horrendous electricity bills as you.
Well, that's part of the issue thing, because reputational damage is really important. Yeah. So any new technology typically runs ahead of the regulator. The regulator's catching up. And so to your point about urban environments, if you have a fire event, which, okay, someone's going to pay the bill, but the ultimate bill for the industry could be the regulator or governments or local councils, moratorium on builds, we want to find out what's going on. Yeah. You get a lot of NIMBYism. So that there's more than just financial or physical loss with one event. It could be a huge reputational damage. So there are multiple other ways of thinking about this, which is unless things are improving, but they have to keep improving. Otherwise, it's going to limit where you can put these things.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but I'll start the conversation. I hope somebody else can pick it up on it. But I'm aware there's a bill going through Parliament. It's got its second reading next month, 24th of March. It's Maria Miller, the MP for Basingstoke. And the essence is that essentially, I think if you correct me if I'm wrong, but if you put a planning application in for a BESS, it'll be classed as hazardous substances, for want of a better reason, and the health and safety executive should be involved, but it's not an effort to stop, this is my understanding, it's to kind of increase the safety awareness level and to really up the entire game. Now, if my understanding is correct, I think that's a great thing. I think that can only help. There'll be other people who'll say, well, it's adding extra cost or regulation, but actually probably not. I think it's actually doing the kind of things that I think we would all agree need doing. Is anybody an expert on parliamentary legislation?
No expert, but we know that sort of one of the reasons why there's been so many deployments in the UK is perhaps that minimal regulation to date. You look at the rest of Europe where they have had some pretty stringent measures, which has perhaps slowed their development pipeline down. I think depending on how that bill goes, but certainly it looks like there will be a requirement to have external consultants from environmental agencies and firefighting services at an early stage to sort of give an opinion at the planning stage. So obviously benefits safety, of course, and I think the scrutiny that's already been placed on certain projects in the pipeline, I think they're ready for that kind of monitoring. So they're in a good place already, no matter what the regulation is.
I think it's important just to add that in at least my experience, every battery developer that I've worked with does take safety very seriously and massively is cautious when it comes to designing the project. Not only under the assumption that it's going to perform well, but they also look at worst case scenario if it doesn't perform well. Things like if they have to put the fire out, where does the water drain to on the project site, because the water will be toxic and could potentially filter into the local environment or the watercourse. So all of these things are massively factored into every one of our clients' designs. So yeah, whilst there might not be the regulation that's pushed that, people are not being lackadaisical about it. They really are thinking with the future in mind.
It's a really important point, and I think the vast majority of people involved in this industry have that attitude and are doing that. The problem, I think, is that it's not 100% yet operating at that fashion or level, and it's the one or two who aren't, and they might not even be in the UK, I don't know, but it's the one or two who aren't who drag it down a little bit, and it's like lowest common denominator stuff. We all get tarred with the same opinion. If there is an incident somewhere, somebody will say, well, they're just not safe. Well, the vast majority are, and people are working hard to make them safe. It's just trying to avoid getting to cycle, I guess.
Just thinking about public perception, I mean, we know that the battery market sort of had an original perception from very few headlines around the world, which is luckily reducing. But, you know, we've all seen an increase in smaller scale or behind the meter, incidents, or perhaps even personal use batteries. Is there sort of application for line tamer for smaller scale batteries?
Really good question. Today, I'll be honest and say no, but tomorrow, and I'm not saying definitely tomorrow, you have to give me a little bit longer than that, but we're looking at it because we know that, and it's not just even the applications we know about today, whether it's e-bikes, EV charging stations, car parks actually is a potential real problem as we're all pushed towards driving EVs, and then we park 100 of them in an underground car park, let's say, that there's an increased risk, I think, over internal combustion engine car parking. All of these applications we're having a look at, we may have to tweak the technology slightly, but we have a plan and a roadmap, and I can't give too much away, otherwise my lawyers will definitely shoot me. And there's going to be applications that we haven't thought about yet, or know about, or haven't yet taken off. From the slightly frightening, I think, electric airplanes, which haven't quite got my head around, but people are making them, developing them, and we've got to think about what we can do to help keep them safe. So watch this space, but it might be a while before the space gets filled.
That's actually a really good point, because we attend a lot of events to talk about this technology, and from one year to another, at first, of course, we always target utilities to try to educate them because they're the big players in the market. But from one year to another, so from 2021 to 2022, the number of people going up to our booths asking about line tamer for residential applications just shot through the roof. It was incredible. From one year to another, just 1 year, so many questions. Smaller developers, homeowners coming to us to talk about this, and it's something that we brought up immediately with Xtralis, with the manufacturer. So the interest has been just, I didn't expect it. I was really shocked. And like Justin said, not just residential, but EV car parks, bike charging, people are very much aware that there's a risk, and it's not the big applications that we all thought it would be, the most obvious application, but it is the smaller ones that are really taking off. We saw that just last year. It was really shocking.
Just following up on that, so do you think that safety is definitely more of a priority for all of those people that we talk to? I mean, we cover EMEA and we go to all sorts of exhibitions. Has that conversation and awareness about the need for safety increased exponentially over the last year or so, do you think?
From what I've seen, yes, because I think that the question of safety will always increase the more information that is out there. So people are being better educated about this, for better or for worse. Some of them have seen the stories of them catching fire. But I think I'd like to think about it positively. They're more informed about the technology. They're having earlier conversations with insurers. They know what they're installing. So yes, there's been a renewed interest. And I think I wanted to highlight a little bit before, but I'd forgotten, where there might be some lack of codes and standards in some jurisdictions, there are some that are the opposite. They have very stringent standards, and they're leading the way. For example, New York City, obviously, they have a great interest in urban environments, urban development, and they're leading the way in codes and standards. And there's whole countries that are just looking to New York for guidance. So sometimes it's looking for the people that are most stringent to kind of lead the way and set the standard for everyone else. And I think that's what's been happening, and that's what people know a lot more than years before, because there are people that are being very stringent, spending more money on things like line tamer and showing everyone else, and people have caught up very quickly.
Very good point. We talked yesterday about, and I'm changing the subject slightly, but it does concern me, and I attack this from an environmental point of view, and a father of 3 daughters who are constantly badgering me about the environment and everything. We talk about post-fire, if the worst happens, and a kind of plan for what you do, particularly as far as cleanup is concerned and environmental. Are you seeing that in people's plans when they're developing? Are they thinking, planning, the usual thing, prepare for the best, plan for the worst?
To be honest, it's not something we've discussed, too frequently with our clients in this area. But someone did raise that question, and I didn't have an answer, and I don't know about you.
We've seen there's a couple of losses, right, where it depends how you fight the problem, so whether it's water or no water. I think that's the biggest determinant, because in theory, if explosion risk has been reduced with deflag vents, etc., then if you take that off the table, and let's just say the battery burns, then in theory it's a fumes and exhaust thing, and that dissipates. I think the challenge becomes, as you mentioned, is if you start dousing things with water and that water leaks out, that can become an issue. But there is some losses, publicly available information on losses in the past, where they did pretty detailed tests around the sort of the culprit unit, let's put it that way. And they tested the soil and it wasn't beyond normal levels. So I'm not saying that that's only a very small sample, of course, but
But it's what do you do with the burnt out carcass of a container and all of that toxic debris? Whilst most of our insurance policies will have a provision for debris removal, if a client asked us where do we go to get this stuff removed, I would like to think that most of them do have an answer, and there is someone in the UK that's knows how to get rid of this sort of.
There's a battery bin inside Tesco by the door. This is a little.
Serious point. Is that a good idea to have them inside? The recycling bins inside public spaces, stores. Is that
Depends on the size that they're willingly able to accept, because it's a really good question. I don't know if your claims guys are sort of seeing additional costs in debris removal, as Sam says. I'd imagine there'd be additional costs associated, whether it's landfill or repurposing. But if it's a complete wasted, burnt out piece of equipment, I suppose it comes down to what's the safest way to dispose of it, and what's the cost, and the insurer's there to, as part of the claim, the insurer's there to sort of settle that, I suppose. Those worries are kind of picked up by insurance policies. That's what we're here for. We are for the actual event and the aftermath. We were there to clear up, and the actual costs themselves, and thankfully we haven't had too many incidents where we've had a fully burnt out container and had to worry about it. We have with smaller incidents which are kind of more contained. But the fully burnt out containers, I think everyone knows what they are, because if they make, I think, the worldwide web with all the wonderful pictures that they produce. So, I imagine it's something as well that's only going to increase in cost. Everyone's very kind of conscious about their waste and removal, so it is something to keep an eye on. I think what we look out for is the initial emergency response plan. Whether that's engaging with the local fire brigade. We're very, very keen on to ensure that an insured and knows what to do when the incident is occurring. But maybe it is something we need to be focusing on as well. Once that incident does occur, what's the next step? I think that's a very sensible thing that we should be thinking about.
So what is the answer? Is it water or not? That was the question.
For suppressing thermal runaway, I think not water, but
there seem to be different opinions, and
I think it's
strong as well either way.
I think it's changed quite a lot in the space of even 2 years, even 12 months, where I think initially people treated battery storage containers or units as, let's say, a more traditional property fire risk. So do you have water suppression in place? Do you have a gaseous system in place? Without, I think, really understanding what a thermal runaway event is. And the semantics are, it's not a fire. It might result in a fire or be caused by a fire. It's a very different sort of reaction. And so I think it took people a while and maybe a loss or two to realize it didn't really help. It adds a lot of complexity in terms of the commissioning stage, and there's been incidents where water suppression systems have been the cause of losses. But just to finish on, there's an interest in what you mentioned about increased awareness of safety. One thing I've noticed with clients, as they build bigger projects, as you described, the line item for insurance on a financial model in dollar terms or pounds or euros becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So at the start, you get a project done, your first project, you just want to build it, you just want to get it working, you worry about the next one. When you start building big projects, the amount you spend on insurance becomes a substantial amount of money in dollar terms. And that's when people start to notice it as a line item and say, hang on a sec, why are we spending that much money? Can we do anything to reduce that spend? We've got another project coming up, what can we do on this one to reduce the spend? And so that's been trickling in, I think, more recently, where people, I wouldn't say it's a sophistication thing, but it might just be a resource thing. As these battery developers grow in size, people are allocated more responsibility to take a closer look at stuff and say, how do we optimize, essentially? So it's becoming a bit more topical, I think, where people have the time to spend to work out what their insurance needs are and costs.
And I think, in an environment where the cost of everything is going up through inflation, land acquisition costs are going up, land lease, costs going up, grid connection costs are going up, development costs are going up. Insurance is being really, looked at more closely, as you say, because people, their margins are getting squeezed. They're making less money than they were a few years ago when everything was a bit cheaper. So, thankfully, there haven't been that many losses in the last, year or so, at least high-profile ones. There's obviously been a few, but, in comparison to the amount of battery projects that have been built and now, are operational, it's still only a small fraction. So, obviously we have an insurer here, so I've got to, be careful what I say, but, we do hope that insurance premium rates will continue to go down like they have over the last year. But all it takes is one, big high-profile loss for insurers to start pushing the other way. So it's within everyone's interest to not only, develop safe projects, but also robust projects that work, and help keep insurers happy for the foreseeable, just to help keep that momentum up and improve the trust and the risk profile of batteries as a whole.
Just off that topic, I think we've seen a lot of variability, obviously, in merchant spot market pricing, and I think those forecasts are slowly coming down slightly at the moment. I'm sure Liam will have sort of seen cases where the revenue that's declared to insurers has been an accurate forecast, and instances where it's perhaps slightly undercooked. And so it's ever more important, on a quarterly basis, 6-monthly basis, not just at the start of a policy, to reflect what the true 12-month revenue forecast would be, because that's exactly what the policies they're designed to do. And I suppose that volatility isn't necessarily going away anytime soon.
Well, I mean, an example, I had a renewal for a relatively small-sized battery, 15 million pounds worth of capex, and the declared revenue was reforecasted 3 times within the kind of the renewal process, and ended up being 3 times what it was the year before because of just the kind of volatility of the electricity market in the UK. So keeping on top of that and ensuring you are kind of purchasing the right level of insurance is so important. It is a worry for insurers to ensure that we understand the exposure that we're taking on, and that kind of, because we are happy to take it on as long as we are able to charge for it and appreciate it and model for it and kind of work it in our systems. It's because policies now are kind of more refined to ensure that kind of we're happy with that exposure. So keeping on top of that's very important.
So how do you have a sort of standard plan procedure for reviewing, keeping on top of that sort of thing, or is it how does that operate?
Well, we'll look at it once a project's operational, kind of every year. Kind of we have a renewal process, but I think kind of the brokers here will be representative of the operator. So that they'll engage with them as often as they need to, I guess, really, and you'll report back to me.
And things change, right? And also, I think that's what I find quite fascinating about the industry is what was insurable 3 years ago might not be what's insurable today. And so losses, people react, technology, people react.
Well, we learn.
Learn, fine,
yeah.
So but it's interesting from your perspective because you might get clients coming to you wanting retroactive installations of your product maybe because they might boost a project which initially looked okay, today looks not as good. Maybe what you do can improve the sort of the risk profile of it. But to Liam's point, the important thing is that we're always engaging with clients and making sure they're aware of Liam's changing perception or different insurers changing perception of battery storage. But it's very dynamic, I think. I think you guys would agree as well, right? What was okay 12 months ago is slightly different.
Well, I think we've all learned an awful lot in the last 24 months as brokers and insurers. It's a rapidly developing technology. Wind and solar has been around a lot longer, and the technology is a bit more established, and there's perhaps a slightly more mature, insurance market for those technologies. So yeah, I mean, we're learning every day, but I think it's only good for the battery industry that an insurance market is becoming more mature in this space for the reasons I said previously. Driving down premium costs at the end of the day, which is so important for all of our clients.
But quite a good signal of the importance of insurance is at these events, they get a couple of slots on the stage. If you go to a wind and solar event, you'd struggle to find a panel about insurance. So it is very topical, and I think people do appreciate it's required. And the financial package relies on a robust insurance policy. And so I think one player in all of this who tends to go not behind the radar, under the radar is the lenders, right? So they drive a lot of the requirements on projects, and they drive what's needed on a deductible level, a coverage level. And so they tend to set the expectations sometimes for the client. And so our job via people like Liam is to sometimes recalibrate that and say, I know that's ideally what you'd like, but the reality might be different.
And to be just on that point, we've had lots of conversations with lenders and their advisors, and they've been, learning as well. They've been quite receptive to different deductible structures for projects which are slightly bigger than what they've seen previously, because as Liam has said, the projects have gone from being 10, 15 megawatts in size to 50 megawatts to now 250, 400, 500 plus. So you can't apply the same mindset to the 50 megawatt project as you would to the 500 megawatt project when it comes to determining what's an acceptable deductible structure. So lenders have been difficult at times with wind and solar because it's a more established market and they know what they think they can get away with. But batteries, we found conversations have been a little bit more fluid and it's a bit more dynamic,
which is understandable. And I've been around for a while. This is definitely the most dynamic, fast-changing industry I've ever been involved in, and that includes things like data centers, which I used to think used to move at a pace and still does, but nothing like this space, which is there's good and bad in that sometimes. I am going to be controversial and just talk about second life batteries just for a minute, because I've been asked to look at a few projects where they're being used, and I'll admit that I'm nervous. And I'm not sure I'm asking the right questions, and I wonder whether anybody's got any thoughts. It boils back to something I mentioned earlier, that the battery companies aren't sharing the BMS data, and I want to know, even from my perspective, the history of the batteries before I even think about it. I don't want to be controversial as it sounds. I don't want to be associated with a project that I already know is going to cause problems. Okay, I can detect those problems, but it's a space I wouldn't want to move into wholeheartedly and say, yes, this is great. Anybody want to say anything on Second Life?
Probably just testing and warranties. I think it's fair to say that that market will expand.
Hugely.
Yep.
Yeah, that's
and
my concern and interest at the same time.
Yeah, and the insurers in the space will be looking at testing procedures and reliability, and obviously what warranties are there to support that technology and its repurposing.
I think it'll be a real shame, in a world where there is a limited amount of readily accessible, lithium and cobalt and valuable minerals, and the mining of those minerals, perhaps has been a little bit, dubious, and from an ESG point of view, we've got to look at that at some point as well. So it'd be a shame to not utilise, all of the cells that have been used, which might still be functioning, well. They've come out of the EV sector, for example, in a secondary life. But to Duncan's point, it's all about how do you verify that they're not going to be faulty, and what warranties are going to be given from the cell manufacturers, in their second life. From an insurance point of view, Liam is probably not going to be very happy insuring, a battery project that's full of second life cells, which perhaps have not been through a rigorous testing regime and aren't under warranty in the same way that, first life cells are. But, if we're looking at the circular economy, we've got to find ways to try and maximise the usage out of these cells and the minerals. We work in a renewable energy market, and we can't just throw these things away.
I don't think we'll see many of them, though. I don't think we'll see a lot of second life battery storage systems. No, I think we'll see them. I know there's the regulation for new batteries to have growing percentage of recycled content.
Yeah.
If we ever get to second life batteries, there's going to be a huge data exercise. You're going to need to know where they came from, what was their use. Probably EVs, as you said, they've been repurposed, remanufactured. Once you start taking batteries apart and you start to switch in cells, healthy ones for unhealthy ones, the cost gets quite prohibitive.
Yeah.
And then you creep. If new battery costs are falling and you've got a very manual cost of repurposing an old one, sometimes it's not worth it. So I think that's the challenge generally in the market for second life is it worth it? Are we just better off recycling them and basically taking them apart and put them into new ones? So yeah, Liam might be the answer eventually.
Well, I think we, as insurers, there's quite a small market of those who are quite happy to write battery energy storage as it is with robust warranties and brand new kit. There'll be an even smaller pool of those who will be happy to take on that risk. So the only way I guess you could make insurers comfortable is you retain that whole risk yourself and demonstrate for a number of projects over a number of years that second life batteries can be can be used and sustainably well, and that incidents won't occur, and that there is, dare I say, little to worry about. Losses happen, incidents happen, that's fine. But I don't want a systemic defect issue with second life batteries because they're tricky enough to insure at the moment. I'd argue we're way off yet. I think taking on second life batteries.
Yeah, undoubtedly, but I'm convinced it's going to come. But back to your point, Sam, we kind of need to do something. There are serious environmental issues, so we're going to have to do something. I think it's not just going to be a case of ignoring it. The problem is going to come, and I'd love, perhaps we'll do this discussion similarly again in the future. I'd love to keep coming back to that topic and see if it is indeed progressing or not.
I've seen about 5% is the estimate of recycled materials in US and UK projects, so it'd be interesting to see as this, over the coming years if that percentage increases.
My personal concern is second life batteries in homes. Nothing to do with this panel, I don't think, but that's what I'm worried about is when you get sort of cowboys taking batteries from old cars and plugging them into garages. And
I've seen far too many incidents like that. That's maybe a different topic, is to get regulation to stop that hard regulation to stop anybody doing things like that. That's not helped. But I'm back to my earlier comment. That's dragging us all down, the whole industry down, when things like that happen. Shouldn't happen. And I love your comment about the small pool for people insuring second life batteries. I suspect it's barely a paddling pool of people that are operating in that space. But it's going to come, I think.
To increase that pool is, your point earlier is sharing information as an industry, kind of making that readily available so that people can take a step forward on improvements that others have made. That's how innovation improves and quickens. So if you can bring insurers and brokers along with that ride of how the industry is changing, it will make it an easier process.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got probably one final question for everybody, I think. And if I gave you a magic wand and you're in charge of the industry totally, but you can only do one thing, you wave your wand once, what one thing might you consider looking at? Anybody want to have a stab at that first? And I've sort of sprung that on everybody.
I would have a worldwide industry must certification for batteries. So there'd be one body in charge of everything.
You have to think of another one.
Didn't you say that was quite challenging before?
Yes, I know. Well, that's why I have a magic wand. So, but it's
there's no limit. Your wand will do anything you want. So, anybody else want to wave their wand?
I was going to say standardization. I've had the task of kind of compiling all the information worldwide, and it's just wading through a lot of really technical information. If I'm struggling with it, I'm sure insurers are as well, underwriters who have to calculate the risk. And if it's one thing, I think would be standardization of how things are measured and tested, and then make that information very easily available and understood quickly.
I think all of our clients are complaining about how long it's taking to get grid connections agreed. So I'll just say to help speed up their development pipelines to ease the restriction on getting grid connections for battery projects.
I can't remember.
It varies per country as well.
They are, yeah. But it's a common theme.
Somebody said something, published something today about they're going to do something to try and increase the speed. I need to, perhaps we'll edit this podcast and I'll put it back in later, the detail that was published this morning. I didn't have a chance to read it, but I'm sure there is a new policy to increase the speed for grid connections. I'll check it.
Editing note, we'll put the fact there if we can find it.
Pause for a second. So anybody else with a magic wand got anything?
What's yours? Because
Yeah, my magic wand is perhaps there's already a healthy pipeline of investment in the projects themselves, but in the same way that the wind and solar growth across most of the world is supported in the early years by subsidies, I think there's obviously a finite resource that is there for many decades, but perhaps ethical and sensible subsidised investment in the supply chain could be what's needed to perhaps support it long term.
Well, I think that's a brilliant point, and we're in the UK today, but obviously we're all aware of the Inflation Reduction Act in the States and how that's impacting. And I'm got nothing against that, but I don't want that to take away potential investment money that we might see in the UK or Europe, and I fear it might, but I'm not going to be precious about that. I know that the European Union has got a funding planning process to accelerate not just energy storage but renewables generally, and I know that Rishi Sunak watches all my podcasts. I urge the current government to put some serious money towards it, because it's going to help everything and everybody in the end. So don't find it somewhere. There's money somewhere that can be put towards it. I think that's my magic wand. So you kind of stole my thunder a little bit. I was going to say,
you can't have the same magic wand. You're going to have there's two.
I'll wave it again. I want to be 30 years younger.
Oh, right, so we can do anything, right?
Well, I didn't say. Well, how's that related to the energy space? I'd have more energy if I was 30 years younger. I want to thank you all really sincerely. I think it's been a great discussion. I hope those watching have found it interesting too. We will, if you're all agreeable, we'll do this again at some point in the future. We'll make some notes and see how the market has changed and what our perception is. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself this afternoon, and thank you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.